Welcome to Wednesday night. Actually, my voice is going to suck tonight, so I apologize in advance, but I definitely feel a lot better. So, welcome to the book club as we continue reading the Celestine Prophecy. And tonight, I have Jen joining me at the house. So, this is going to be cool. Thank you for joining us. You want to say anything before we get started?
I do. I want to just take a moment, take a deep breath in. Let that breath go deep, deep down into your pelvic bowl. Just let it sit there. Let it infiltrate you. And as you breathe out, release any tension, release any holding. Intentionally say to yourself, I now end all wars within myself. And I want us to just sit here for a moment and hold all of the people in our hearts that are experiencing the wars that are going on outside of us. And knowing that coming to these book clubs every week, coming to the Gene Keys every week, doing our rising ritual or doing whatever version of loving yourself looks like in this moment, in this day, is how we end the wars within ourselves. And when we end the wars inside of ourselves, we end the wars outside of ourselves. And so I just want to take this moment and acknowledge you for the work that you are doing. And I know that sometimes it feels like it's nothing, like it's the teeniest drop in this big cosmic ocean of anger and violence and hate and war. But that teeny tiny drop makes a huge fucking difference. So keep doing it. Keep saying to yourself, I am willing to learn how to love you in whatever expression that looks like. Whether that's pausing and taking a breath to make a conscious choice differently than you would have before. Whether that is stopping yourself from guilting yourself or shaming yourself for making a decision that you could have done better with, and instead taking that information to choose better next time. In whatever variation, whatever expression loving yourself looks like, please know that it is needed and it does make a difference. And that the energetic work that we're doing here is just as profound and impactful as the external physical work that gets done. And so my heart goes out to everybody who is in a war-torn region, whatever that is. Right now, what's alive is Israel and Palestine, and there are so many other wars that are going on. So many other wars. Wars between religions, wars between genders, wars between sexualities, wars between colors of skin. And all of it stems down to the fact that we are all people, and we have forgotten that we are all people, that we are all sacred, that we are all beings, that we are all here in servitude to this earth that is here providing for us. And so the work is to remember and to help each other remember. We're all cut from the same cloth. We all have the same blood running through our veins. We're all breathing the same air. We're all made of energy. Just looks different. With that, I am complete. Oh,
Wow. I didn't expect to start that way.
it's been on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Thank
going to
you.
go into the Celestine Prophecy. This is the classwork, the coursework right here.
So page 47, the last paragraph.
I will go ahead and read, and don't feel like you have to read if your voice is bothering you or anything. So
I don't mind.
I will kick it off. He told me what interested him most were the results of a particular study which showed that while nutritionally rich plants of the kind grown at Vicente increased the body's efficiency dramatically, the increase was beyond what could be reasonably expected from the nutrients themselves, as we understand how they work in human physiology. Something inherent in the structure of these plants created an effect not yet accounted for. I looked at Marjorie, then asked, then the focusing of attention on these plants gave them something that boosts human strength in return when they're eaten? Is this the energy mentioned in the manuscript? Marjorie looked at the professor. He gave me only a half smile. I don't know yet, he said. I asked him about his future research, and he explained that he wanted to duplicate the garden at Washington State and set up some long-term studies to see if people eating these plants had more energy or were healthier over a longer period of time. As he spoke, I couldn't help glancing periodically at Marjorie. Suddenly, she looked incredibly beautiful. Her body appeared longer and slender, even under her baggy jeans and t-shirt. Her eyes and hair were dark brown, and her hair fell in tapered curls around her face. I felt a powerful physical attraction. At the exact moment I became aware of this attraction, she turned her head, stared directly into my eyes, and backed away from me a step. I've got to meet someone, she said. Maybe I'll see you later. She told Haynes goodbye, smiled coyly at me, and walked past the metal building and down the path. After a few more minutes of discussion with the professor, I wished him well and strolled back to where Sarah was standing. She was still talking intensely with one of the other researchers, but she followed me with her eyes as I walked. As I approached, the man she was with smiled, rearranged the notes on his clipboard, and walked into the building. Find out anything? Sarah asked. Yes, I said distractedly. It sounds like these folks are doing some interesting things. I was looking at the ground when she said, where did Marjorie go? As I glanced up, I could see she had an amused look on her face. She said she had to meet someone. Did you turn her off? She asked, smiling now. I laughed. I guess I did, but I didn't say a thing. You didn't have to, she said. Marjorie could detect a change in your field. It was pretty obvious. I could see it all the way over here. A change in my what? In the energy field around your body. Most of us have learned to see them, at least in certain light. When a person has sexual thoughts, that person's energy field sort of swirls around and actually propels out toward the person who's the object of the attraction. This struck me as totally fantastic. But before I could comment, we were distracted by several people coming out of the metal building. Time now for energy projections, Sarah said. You'll want to see this. We followed 4 young men, apparently students, to a plot of corn. As we walked closer, I realized that the plot was made up of 2 separate subplots, each about 10 feet square. The corn in one was about 2 feet high, in the other, the plants were less than 15 inches. The four men walked to the plot containing the taller corn, then sat down, each in one corner of the plot facing inward. On cue, they all seemed to focus their eyes on the plants. The late afternoon sun shone from behind me, bathing the plot in soft amber light. Yet the woods beyond remained dark in the distance. The plot of corn and the students were silhouetted against the almost black background. Sarah was standing beside me. This is perfect, she said. Look, can you see that? What? They're projecting their energy onto the plants. I stared intently at the scene, but couldn't detect anything. Oh, but could detect nothing. I can't see anything, I said. Squat down lower then, Sarah said, and focus on the space between the people and the plants. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of light, but I concluded it was just an after image or my eyes playing tricks on me. I tried several more times to see something, then gave up. I can't do it, I said, standing. Sarah patted me on the shoulder. Don't worry about it. The first time is the most difficult. It usually takes some experimenting with the way you focus your eyes. One of the meditators looked over at us and brought his index finger up to his lips, so we walked back toward the building. Are you going to be here at Vicente long? Sarah asked. Probably not, I said. The person I'm with is looking for the last part of the manuscript. She looked surprised. I thought all of it had been located, though I guess I wouldn't know. I've been so engrossed in the first part that pertains to my work that I haven't read much of the rest. I instinctively reached for my pants pocket, suddenly uncertain where Sarah's translation was. It was rolled up in my back pocket. You know, Sarah said, we found two periods of the day most conducive to seeing energy fields. One is sunset, the other is sunrise. If you want, I'll meet you at dawn tomorrow and we'll try again. She reached out for the folder. That way, she continued, I can make you a copy of this translation and you can take it with you. I pondered the suggestion for a few seconds, then decided it couldn't hurt. Why not? I said. I'll have to check with my friend, though, and make sure we have enough time. I smiled at her. What makes you think I can learn to see this stuff? Call it a hunch. We agreed to meet on the hill at 6 a.m., and I started the 1 mile trek back to the lodge alone. The sun had completely disappeared, but its light still bathed the gray clouds along the horizon in hues of orange. The air was chilly, but no wind blew. At the lodge, a line was forming in front of the serving bar in the huge dining room. Feeling hungry, I walked toward the head of the line to see what food was being served. Will and Professor Haynes were standing near the front, talking casually. Well, Will said, how did the afternoon go? Great, I said. This is William Haynes, Will added. Yes, I said, we met earlier. The professor nodded. I mentioned my early morning rendezvous the next day. Will saw no problem, as he wanted to find a couple of people he hadn't talked to yet, and didn't anticipate leaving before 9. I know. The line moved forward then, and the people behind us invited me to join my friends. I stepped in beside the professor. So what do you make of what we're doing here? Haynes asked. I don't know, I said. I'm trying to let it soak in a little. The whole idea of energy fields is new to me. The reality of it is new to everyone, he said. But the interesting thing is that this energy is what science has always been looking for. Some common stuff underlying all matter. Since Einstein particularly, physics has sought a unified field theory. I don't know if this is it or not, but at the very least, the manuscript has stimulated some interesting research. What would it take for science to accept this idea? I asked. A way to measure it, he said. The existence of this energy field is not that foreign, actually. Karate masters have talked about an underlying chi energy responsible for their seemingly impossible stunts of breaking bricks with their hands and of being able to sit in one place unmoved with 4 men trying to push them over. And we've all seen athletes make spectacular moves, twisting, turning, hanging in the air in ways that defy gravity. It's all the result of this hidden energy that we have access to. Of course, it won't really be accepted until more people can actually see it themselves. Have you ever observed it? I asked. I've observed something, he said. It really depends on what I've eaten. How so? Well, the people around here who who readily see these energy fields eat mostly vegetables. And they usually eat only these highly potent plants they've grown themselves. He pointed ahead to the food bar. This is some of it. Though thank goodness they serve some fish and fowl for old guys like me who are addicted to meat. But if I force myself to eat differently, yes, I can see something. I asked him why he didn't change his diet for longer periods of time. I don't know, he said. Old habits die hard. The line moved forward and I ordered only vegetables. The three of us joined a larger table of guests and talked casually for an hour. Then Will and I walked out to the Jeep to remove our gear. Have you seen these energy fields? I asked. He smiled and nodded. My room is on the first floor, he said. Yours is on the third, room 306. You can pick your key up at the desk. And I'll pass that on to you.
Thank you. The room had no phone, but a lodge attendant I saw in the hallway assured me that someone would knock on my door at 5 a.m. sharp. I lay down and thought for a few minutes. The afternoon had been long and full, and I understood Will's silence. He wanted me to experience the third insight in my own way. The next thing I knew, someone was banging on the door. I looked at my watch, 5 a.m. When the attendant knocked again, I said, "Thank you," in a voice loud enough for him to hear, then rose and looked out the small frame window. The only sign of morning was a pale glow of the light toward the east. I walked down the hall and showered, then dressed quickly and went downstairs. The dining room was open and a surprising number of people were moving about. I ate only fruit and hurried outside. Strands of fog drifted across the grounds and clung to the distant meadows. Songbirds called one another from the trees. As I walked away from the lodge, the very top of the sun breached the horizon toward the east. The color was spectacular. The sky was a deep blue above the bright peach horizon. I arrived at the knoll 15 minutes early, so I sat down and leaned against the trunk of a tree, fascinated by the web of gnarled branches growing out above my head. In a few minutes, I heard someone walking toward me along the path, and I looked that way, expecting to see Sarah. Instead, I saw someone I didn't know, a man in his mid-40s. He left the path and walked my way without noticing me. When he was within 10 feet, he saw me with a start, which made me flinch also. "Oh, hello," he said with a rich Brooklyn accent. He was dressed in jeans and hiking boots and looked exceptionally fit and athletic. His hair was curly and receding. I nodded. "Sorry about walking up on you suddenly," he said. "No problem." He told me his name was Phil Stone, and I told him who I was, and then and who I was, and that I was waiting for a friend. "You must be doing some research here," I added. "Not really," he replied. "I work for the University of Southern California. We're doing studies in another province of the rainforest." What is that?
In
De-
another province on the rainforest depletion.
Depletion. Okay. But whenever I get a chance, I drive over here and take a break. I like hanging out where the forests are so different. He looked around. "Do you realize some of the trees here are close to 500 years old? This is truly a virgin forest, a rare thing. Everything in perfect balance. The larger trees filtering the sunlight, allowing the multitude of tropical plant life to thrive underneath. The plant life in the rainforest is old too, but it grows differently. It's basically jungle. This is more like what an old forest looks like in a temperate zone, which are such as in the United States. I've never seen anything like this there," I said. "I know," he said, "only a few remain. Most of the ones I know were sold by the government to lumber interests, as though they all could see in a forest like this. Wow, I'm struggling. As though all they could see in a forest like this is board feet of lumber. Damn shame that anyone would mess with a place like this. Look at that energy. You can see the energy here? I asked. He looked at me closely, as though deciding whether to elaborate. Yes, I can, he said finally. Well, I haven't been able to, I said. I tried yesterday, and when were meditating with I tried yesterday when they were meditating with the plants of the garden. Oh, I couldn't see fields that large at first either, he said. I had to start by looking at my fingers. How do you mean? Let's move over there, he said, pointing to an area where the trees parted slightly and the blue sky showed through overhead. I'll show you. When we arrive, he said, lean back and touch the tips of your index finger together. Keep the blue sky in the background. Now separate the tips about an inch and look at the area directly between them. What do you see? Dust on the lens of my eye. Ignore that, he said. Take your eyes out of focus a little and move the tips closer, then further apart. As he talked, I moved my fingers around, unsure of what he meant by taking my eyes out of focus. I finally placed my gaze vaguely in an area between my fingers. Both fingertips went slightly blurry. As this happened, I saw something like strands of smoke stretching between the tips. Good grief, I said, and I explained what I saw. That's it. That's it, he said. Now just play with that a little while. I touched all four fingers together, then my palms and forearms. In each case, I continued to see streaks of energy between the body parts. I dropped my arms and looked at Phil. Oh, you want to see mine? He asked. He stood up and stepped back a few feet, positioning his head and his torso so the sky would be directly behind him. I tried for a few minutes, but the noise behind us broke my concentration. I turned and saw Sarah. Phil stepped forward and grinned broadly. Is this the person you've been waiting for? As Sarah approached, she too was smiling. Hey, I know you, she said, pointing at Phil. They embraced warmly. Then Sarah looked at me and said, Sorry I'm late. My mental alarm didn't go off for some reason. But now I guess I know why. I gave you two a chance to talk. What have you been doing? He just learned how to see the fields between his fingers, Phil said. Sarah looked at me. Last year, Phil and I were up here at this very spot, learning to do the same thing. She glanced at Phil. Let's put our backs together. Maybe we can see the energy between us. They stood back to back in front of me. I suggested they move closer and they stepped toward me until the space between us was about 4 feet. They were silhouetted against the sky, which was still dark blue in that direction. To my surprise, the space between them looked lighter. It was yellow or yellowish pink. He sees it, Phil said, reading my expression. Sarah turned and grabbed Phil by the arm, and they slowly stepped away from me so that their bodies were perhaps 10 feet away. Surrounding their upper torsos was a whitish pink field of energy. Okay, Sarah said seriously. She had walked over and crouched down beside me. Now look at this scene here, the beauty. I was immediately awed by the shapes and forms around me. I seemed to be able to focus on each of the massive oaks in a total way, not merely on one part, but on the whole form at once. I was immediately struck by the unique shape and configuration of limbs each displayed. I looked from one to the other, turning all around. Doing this somehow increased the feeling of presence each oak exuded to me, as though I was seeing them for the first time, or at least fully appreciating them for the first time. Suddenly, the tropical foliage underneath the huge trees attracted my attention. I again looked at the unique form each plant exhibited. I also noticed the way each type of plant grew together with others of its own kind. No, in what struck me as little communities. For instance, the tall banana trees were poised among even smaller fern-like plants. When I looked at these mini environments, I was again struck by their uniqueness of outline and presence. Less than 10 feet away, in a particular foliage plant caught my eye. I had often owned just this type of houseplant, a particular variegated form of a philodendron. Dark green, its foliage branched out to about 4 feet in diameter. The shape of this plant seemed perfectly healthy and vibrant. Yeah, focus on that one, but loosely, Sarah said. As I did so, I played with the focus of my eyes. At one point, I tried to focus on the space 6 inches to one side of each physical part of the plant. Gradually, I began to pick up glimpses of light. Then, with a single adjustment of my focus, I could see a bubble of white light encircling the plant. I'm seeing something now, I said. Look around some, Sarah said. I stepped back in shock. Around each plant within my vision was a field of whitish light, visible yet totally transparent, so that none of the plant's color or form was obscured. I realized that what I was seeing was an extension of each plant's unique beauty. It was as though first I had seen the plants, then I had seen their uniqueness and presence, and then something had amplified in the pure beauty of their physical expression, at which time I had seen the energy fields. See if you can see this, Sarah said. She sat down in front of me and faced the philodendron. A plume of whitish light encircled her body, erupted outward, and engulfed the philodendron. The diameter of the plant's energy field, in turn, broadened by several feet. Damn, I exclaimed, which provoked laughter between the two friends. Soon I was laughing myself, conscious of the peculiarity of what was happening, but feeling absolutely no uneasiness at seeing, quite readily, phenomena I had totally doubted minutes earlier. I realized that the perception of the fields, rather than evoking a surrealistic sensation, actually made things about me seem more solid and real than before. Yet at the same time, everything around me seemed different. The only reference I had for the experience was perhaps a movie which enhanced the color of the forest in order to make it seem mystical or enchanted. The plants, the leaves, the sky now all stood out with a presence and a slight shimmer that suggested life there, and perhaps consciousness, beyond our ordinary assumption. After seeing this, there would be no way to take a forest for granted again. And I'm going to pass.
I looked at Phil. Sit down and put your energy on the philodendron. I said, I'd like to compare. Phil appeared perplexed. I can't do it, he said. I don't know why. I looked at Sarah. Some people can and some can't, she said. We haven't figured it out. Marjorie has to screen her graduate students to see who can do it. A couple of psychologists are trying to correlate this ability with personality characteristics, but so far no one knows. Let me try it, I said. Okay, go ahead. I sat down again and faced the plant. Sarah and Phil stood at right angles to me. Okay, how do I begin? Just focus your attention on the plant as though to inflate it with your energy, Sarah said. I looked at the plant and imagined energy swelling up inside. Then, after a few minutes, I looked over at the two. Sorry, Sarah said wryly. You're obviously not one of the chosen few. I shot a mock frown at Phil. Angry voices from the path below interrupted our conversation. Through the trees, we could see a group of men passing, talking harshly amongst themselves. Who are those people? Phil asked, looking at Sarah. I don't know, she said. More folks upset with what we're doing, I guess. I looked back at the forest around us. Everything appeared ordinary again. Hey, I can't see the energy fields anymore. Some things bring you right down, don't they? Sarah remarked. Phil smiled and patted my shoulder. You can do it again at any time now. It's just like riding a bicycle. All you have to do is see the beauty and then extend from there. I suddenly remembered to check the time. The sun was much higher in the sky, and a light mid morning breeze swayed the trees. My watch showed 7:50. I guess I better head back, I said. Sarah and Phil joined me as we walked. I looked back at the wooded hillside. That's one beautiful place, they said. Too bad there aren't more places like this in the States. Once you see the energy fields in other areas, Phil said, you'll realize just how dynamic this forest is. Look at these oaks. They are very rare in Peru, but they grow here at Vicente. A cut forest, especially one that's been stripped of hardwoods in order to grow pines for profit, has a very low energy field. And a city, except for the people, has a different kind of energy altogether. I tried to focus on the plants along the path, but the act of walking disrupted my concentration. You're sure I'll see these fields again? I said. Absolutely, Sarah replied. I've never heard of anyone failing to duplicate the experience once they've seen them initially. We had a research ophthalmologist come through here once, and he got all excited after he learned to see the fields. Turned out he had been working with certain sight abnormalities, including forms of color blindness, and concluded that some people have what he called lazy receptors in their eyes. He had taught people how to see colors they'd never experienced before. According to him, seeing energy fields was just a matter of doing the same thing, of waking up other dormant receptors, something that everyone theoretically can do. I wish I lived near a place like this, I said. Don't we all? Phil replied, then looked around me at Sarah. Is Dr. Haynes still here? Yes, Sarah said. He can't leave. Phil looked at me. Now there's a guy who's doing some interesting research on what this energy can do for you. Yeah, I said, I talked with him yesterday. The last time I was here, Phil continued, he was telling me about a study he would like to conduct in which he would look at the physical effects of merely being near certain high energy environments, such as that forest back there. He would use the same measurements of organ efficiency and output to see the effects. Well, I already know the effects, Sarah said. Whenever I drive into this estate, I begin to feel better. Everything is amplified. I seem stronger. I can't think more clearly and I can think more clearly and quickly. And the insights I have into all this and how it relates to my work in physics is amazing. What are you working on? I asked. Do you remember me telling you about the perplexing experiments in particle physics during which these little bits of atoms appeared wherever the scientists expected them to be? Yes. Well, I've tried to expand this idea a bit with some experiments of my own, not to solve the problems those guys were working on in subatomic particles, but to explore questions I told you about before. To what extent does the physical universe as a whole, since it's made up of the same basic energy, respond to our expectations? To what extent do our expectations create all the things that happen to us? The coincidences, you mean? Yes. Think of the events of your life. The old Newtonian idea is that everything happens by chance, that one can make good decisions and be prepared, but that every event has its own line of causation independent of our attitude. After the recent discoveries of modern physics, we may legitimately ask if the universe is more dynamic than that. Perhaps the universe runs mechanistically as a basic operation, but then also subtly responds to the mental energy we project out into it. I mean, why not? If we can make plants grow faster, maybe we can make certain events come faster or slower depending on how we think. Does the manuscript talk about any of this? Sarah smiled at me. Of course. That's where we're getting these ideas. She began to dig around in her pack as we walked, finally pulling out a folder. Here's your coffee, she said. I glanced at it briefly and placed it in my pocket. We were crossing the bridge, and I hesitated a moment, observing the colors and forms of the plants around me. I altered my focus and immediately saw the energy fields around everything in my view. Both Sarah and Phil had wide fields, which seemed to be tinted yellow green, though Sarah's field occasionally flashed with a pinkish color. Suddenly, they both stopped and looked intently up the trail. Ahead, about 50 feet, a man walked quickly toward us. A sensation of anxiety filled my stomach, but I was determined to maintain my view of the energy. As he approached, I recognized him. He was the taller of the scientists from the University of Peru who had asked for directions the day before. Around him, I could detect a layer of red. When he walked up to us, he turned to Sarah and condescendingly said, "You're a scientist, aren't you?" "That's right," Sarah replied. "Then how can you tolerate this kind of science? I've seen these gardens and I can't believe the sloppiness. You people haven't controlled for anything. There could be many explanations for certain plants growing larger here." "Controlling for everything is impossible, sir. We're looking for general tendencies." I could detect an edge growing in Sarah's voice. "But postulating some new visible energy that underlies the chemistry of living things, that's absurd. You have no proof. Proof is what we're looking for." "But how can you postulate the existence of anything before you get some proof?" The voices of both individuals sounded angry now, but I was only vaguely listening. What consumed my attention was the dynamics of their energy fields. When the discussion began, Phil and I had backed up a few feet, and Sarah and the taller man had squared off facing each other with a distance of about 4 feet between them. Immediately, both their fields had seemed to grow more dense and excited somehow, as though from an inner vibration. As the conversation progressed, their fields began to intermingle. When one of them made a point, his field would create a movement which seemed to suck at the other's field with what appeared to be a kind of vacuum maneuver. But then, as the other person made his rebuttal, the energy would move back in his direction. In terms of dynamics of energy fields, winning the point seemed to mean capturing part of the opponent's field and pulling it into oneself. "Besides," Sarah was saying to the man, "we have observed the phenomenon we're trying to understand." The man gave Sarah a disdainful look. "Then you are insane as well as incompetent," he said, and walked away. "You're a dinosaur," Sarah shouted, which made Phil and me laugh. Sarah, however, was still tense. "These people can make me angry," Sarah said, as we resumed our walk along the path. "Forget it," Phil said. "These kinds of people come around sometimes." "But why so many?" Sarah asked, "and why right now?" As we walked up to the lodge, I could see Will at the Jeep. The doors of the vehicle were open and gear was spread out on top of the hood. He saw me immediately and motioned for me to come over. "Well, it looks like I'm about to take off," I said. My comment broke a 10-minute silence, which had begun when I had tried to explain what I had seen happen to Sarah's energy during the argument. Evidently, I had not put it very well because my comments had provoked only blank stares and had cast us all into a long period of self-absorption. "It's been nice meeting you," Sarah said, offering her a hand. Phil was looking toward the Jeep. "Is that Will James?" he asked. "Is he the guy you're traveling with?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" "I just wondered. I've seen him around. He knows the owner of this place and was one of the early group. He was one of the early group that first encouraged the research on energy fields here." "Come on up and meet him," I said. "No, I have to go," he said. "I'll see you around here later on. I know you won't be able to stay away." "No doubt," I said. Sarah interjected that she too needed to go and that I could contact her through the lodge. I delayed them for a few more minutes, expressing my thanks for the lesson. Sarah's expression grew serious. Seeing the energy, grasping this new way of perceiving the physical world, grows through a kind of contagion. We don't understand it, but when a person hangs out with others who see this energy, usually they begin to see it too. So go, show it to someone. I nodded and then hurried up to the Jeep. Will greeted me with a smile. "Are you about ready?" I asked. "Almost," he said. "How did the morning go?" "Interesting," I said. "I've got a lot to talk to you about." "You better save it for now," he said. "We need to get out of here. Things are looking unfriendly." I walked closer to him. What's going on? Nothing too serious, he said. I'll explain later. Get your stuff. I walked into the lodge and picked up the few items I had left in my room. Will had told me earlier that there would be no charge, courtesy of the owner, so I walked down to the desk and handed the clerk my keys and walked back outside to the Jeep. Will was under the hood checking something and he slammed it closed as I walked up. Okay, he said, let's go. We drove out of the parking lot and then down the drive toward the main road. Several cars were leaving at the same time. So, what's happening? I asked Will. A group of local officials, he replied, along with some scientific types, have complained about the people associated with this conference center. They're not alleging that anything illegal is going on, just that some of the folks hanging around here may be what they call undesirable, not legitimate scientists. These officials could cause a lot of trouble, and that could effectively put the lodge out of business. I looked at him blankly and he continued. You see, this lodge normally has several groups booked at any one time. Only a small number have anything to do with research associated with the manuscript. The others are groups focused on their own disciplines who come down here for the beauty. If the officials get too ugly and create a negative climate, these groups will stop meeting here. But I thought you said the local officials wouldn't tamper with the tourist money coming into Vicente. I didn't think they would. Someone has them nervous about the manuscript. Did anyone at the gardens understand what was occurring? No, not really, I said. They're just wondering why all of a sudden more angry people were around. Will remained silent. We drove out the gate and turned southeast. A mile later, we took another road which headed due east toward the mountain range in the distance. We'll be right by the gardens, Will said after a while. Ahead, I saw the plots in the first metal building. As we came alongside, the door opened and I met eyes with the person coming out. It was Marjorie. She smiled and turned toward me as we passed, our gaze lingering for a moment. Who was that? Will asked. A woman I met yesterday. He nodded, then changed the subject. Did you get a look at the third insight? I was given a copy. Will didn't reply, appearing to be lost in thought, so I pulled out the translation and found where I had stopped reading. From there, the third insight elaborated on the nature of beauty, describing this perception as one through which humans would eventually learn to observe energy fields. Once this occurred, it said, then our understanding of the physical universe would quickly transform. For instance, we would begin to eat more foods which were still alive with this energy. And we would become conscious that certain localities radiate more energy than others. The highest radiation coming from old natural environments, especially forests. I was about to read the final pages when Will suddenly spoke. Tell me what you experienced back at the gardens, he said. As best I could, I related in detail the events of the 2 days, including the people I had met. When I told him of the encounter with Marjorie, he looked at me and smiled. How much did you talk to these people about other insights and how these insights relate to what we're doing in the garden, what they're doing in the gardens? I didn't mention them at all, I replied. I didn't trust them at first, and later I just figured they knew more than me. I think you could have given them some important information had you been perfectly honest with them. What kind of information? He looked at me warmly. Only you know that. I was at a loss for words, so I looked out at the landscape. The terrain was growing increasingly hilly and rocky. Large granite outcroppings overhung the road. What do you make of seeing Marjorie again as we passed the gardens? Will asked. I started to say just a coincidence, but instead I said, I don't know. What do you think? I don't think anything happens by coincidence. To me, it means you two have unfinished business, something you needed to say to each other that you didn't. The idea intrigued me, but disturbed me as well. I had been accused all my life of remaining too distant, of asking questions but not expressing opinions or committing to a position. Why, I wondered, was this coming up again now? I also noticed that I was beginning to feel differently. At Vicente, I had felt adventurous and confident, and now I was feeling what could only be called a growing depression mixed with anxiety. What time is it? Oh, is there only one page?
I can finish one more page if you want.
Okay.
Now you've made me depressed, I said. He laughed loudly, then replied, It wasn't me. It was the effect of leaving Vicente estate. The energy of that place makes you high as a kite. Why do you think these scientists began hanging around here years ago? They don't have a clue as to why they like it so much. He turned to look directly at me. But we do, don't we? He checked the road and looked at me again, his face full of regard. You have to crank up your own energy when you leave this place like that, when you leave a place like that. I just looked at him, puzzled, and he gave me a reassuring smile. Afterward, we both were silent for perhaps a mile when he said, Tell me more of what happened at the gardens. I continued the story. When I described actually seeing energy fields, he looked at me with amazement, but said nothing. Can you see these fields? I asked. He shot me a glance. Yes, he said, Go on. I related the story without interruption until I came to Sarah's argument about with the Peruvian scientists and the dynamics of their energy fields during the confrontation. What did Sarah and Phil say about that? He asked. Nothing, I said. They didn't seem to have a frame of reference for it. I didn't think so, Phil said. They're so fascinated with the third insight that they haven't yet gone forward. How humans compete for energy is the fourth insight. Compete for energy, I asked. He merely smiled, nodding toward the translation I was holding. I picked up where I had left off. The text pointed clearly at the fourth insight. It said that eventually humans would see the universe as comprised of one dynamic energy, an energy that can sustain us and respond to our expectations. Yet, we would also see that we have been disconnected from larger source of this energy, that we have cut ourselves off and have felt weak and insecure and lacking. In the face of this deficit, we humans have always sought to increase our personal energy in the only manner we have known, by seeking psychologically steal it from others, an unconscious competition that underlies all human conflict in the world.
What a place to end on in this time.
Right?
Like, what a place to end on, because that's
exactly what's happening.
Yeah, like that's what it's talking about in the prayer. Like at the beginning, when we do what needs to be done to allow ourselves to feel safe and loved and protected, right? Well, forget protected. When we're safe, we don't need to be protected, to me. But when we do what needs to be done to allow ourselves to remember that we are safe and loved, then we get to stop trying to manipulate others to make us feel that way. And that goes into the emotional responsibility. Being emotionally responsible for yourself, meaning it is my responsibility to do what I need to do to allow myself to remember that I am safe and I am loved. And that means giving it to myself. That doesn't mean, well, I'm going to do this thing for Paul,
right?
So that way he'll do this thing for me and then I'll feel okay. Right? That's what we're taught.
Right.
That's how we're taught. That's a transaction. That's not love. That's not doing what you need to do to be safe. What that looks like can look so differently for everybody, and it looks different in every moment. Sometimes that's me waking up in the mornings to do my rising ritual, doing yoga, doing meditation, doing my sit with nature, and doing my expression practice. Other days, it's giving myself permission to just lay in bed and be exhausted and rest. And it's also making the choices of what foods to eat. Like I just went to dinner right now with a friend, and we went to a Mexican restaurant, and I can feel my energy lower than it is when I normally eat my regular foods, which is, the juices that I make at home, fruits, vegetables, hummus, nuts. Like that's my normal diet now. And I'm telling you, I feel like I'm just constantly high. Like, high as in on the medicine. Like, but like it's making those conscious
Energetically high.
decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. It's funny. I keep every time they were talking about the energy fields and focusing, I kept thinking of, do you remember those paintings, that artwork? When I was younger, I remember they had this whole store in the mall that was like this very abstract piece of art, but if you stared at it and let
Long
your
enough,
eyes
you would see the
twist and you would see the
design.
design in it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was seeing, what I was picturing when he was talking about it. But then bringing that even a little bit more in, and aware of the energy that I do see today. I
Mhm.
mean, I wish I could see. I don't think I'm as in tune as I would want to be, but I definitely can feel people's energy.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a little bit of kind of the reference point for me is well, and Kundalini kind of teaches that whole practice of expanding our energy, and
Mhm.
what all these energies are, and why we are who we are.
Yeah.
When somebody walks in the room, you know who they are.
Yeah.
It's like they don't need to even open their mouth. Once they open their mouth, it solidifies it. But there's an energy we all put out there, and it's neat to see it in writing. I'm really, I don't know, this book is blowing me
Right.
away.
It's like reading your mind. The first time I read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, I am reading my mind right now.
Right.
Like somebody took what's going on in my fucking head and wrote it into a book.
Right.
What?
Right.
And it made me feel not crazy. I love the part she was like, oh, my mental alarm didn't go off. I didn't know why, but now I get it, right? Couldn't we all just go through life like that instead of beating ourselves up for not waking up at the time that we intended to wake up? Instead, being like, oh, I understand why I didn't wake up at the time I intended to wake up, because you two are meant to have this conversation and spend this time without me here.
Right.
Like,
Right.
that has been one of the biggest shifts in my way of being over the last 2 years, especially in the creation of the sacred wild.
Right.
Of, oh, I'm feeling the desire to do this. Okay. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh, that's why I felt like doing that.
Yeah.
That's why, instead of like pushing and forcing and, trying to trying to build the sacred wild into this, you know, checklist of what a community should be. Instead, it's really been this like expression, this divine creation of like this inspired idea of like, oh, okay, and then we're gonna do this. Oh, okay, and then we're gonna do this. Like, it's been such an interesting practice,
Right.
and lesson that the sacred wilds taught me in this, perspective.
I love that we're sitting next to this plant, this prayer plant. When I got when I got home today from when I picked it up, it was literally all the leaves were laying flat. And as the night goes on, the leaves have rose. And the guy told me they would do that every single night. They'd go back to limp in the morning, and throughout the day they just lay flat and collect the sun. And then in the evening they get a shine, they get to lift up their hands and pray. And we're just reading a book on all this energy and in the plants, how we, when we put the right energy into them, they take care of us.
Yeah. I mean, and it's so wild. And I also love that they illuminated the correlation between being able to see and feel and experience these energies and diet, what we put into our body.
Yeah.
And that, like, that has been one of the most profound shifts in my life, has been over these last few months, reorient, or this last year and a half, honestly, reorienting and recultivating my relationship with not just with food, but with my body. And I can say it's a temple all I want, but I wasn't treating it that way.
Right.
I wasn't. And on this other side of it, right, and I'm a student, by in no way shape or form have I mastered anything. I've mastered being a student of things. And the reality that when we are in addiction with something, it cannot nourish us.
Right.
Like with tobacco.
Yeah.
When I was in addiction to tobacco, it didn't serve me at all. However, now it does serve me because I'm not addicted to it. That relationship is no longer one of addiction towards like I need it to be okay. I need it to be safe. I need it to be da, da, da. Now it's like, oh my gosh, I'm like flying in this alternate realm. I need to come back down to earth. So let's go round. And the tobacco that I normally smoke is wild grown tobacco. And that allows it to be grounded, allows me to ground down into this like reality. And the same thing with food. Like, and it's so perfect that this is happening right now, right after I went out to eat. And it wasn't even like I had fish and beans and some rice. It's not like I had, right, this fried chimichanga or something. And even that, I can feel a difference in my energy level, like right, in the energy that I'm expressing in my energy field. I can feel a difference, like, oh, and it's that hint of like the oppression, the depression, like it weighs my body down instead of nourishing my body and supporting my body. It takes away from it, which is just has been so fascinating to me. And healing that addiction with food has allowed me to like take in what nourishes me, and the amount of food that I eat is so much less than it ever has been.
Right, because your body knows what it needs.
Yeah, and it's getting what it needs. It doesn't have to eat so much to get the nutrients that it needs because right, I'm eating nutrient dense food, so it takes less of the food because there's more nutrients in it.
Yeah, that's one I battle a lot. I'm working on the food thing. I'm back to not doing so healthy. Let myself slip a little bit. It's temporary.
Right, and that serves a purpose also.
Right. Yeah, right? Yeah, 15 pounds. That's the purpose it serves.
It's all a lesson. It's right, all there. Like we're only given what we need to learn, to grow, to transform, to be in alignment. And sometimes it takes 15 pounds for you to be in alignment.
Right.
You never know.
Yeah, that is for sure. There's a lesson in it all.
And then the description of the like with the anger,
yeah,
and the arguments.
Yeah.
And when we're working, like I'm so done with the word narcissist. When we're working, when we're connecting with somebody that's in a wounded space, the only way they know how to be safe is by taking, or the only way they know how to be more powerful is not for them to be more powerful, but to make you less, to take your power away. Now, it doesn't work when the other person is not in a wounded space. It usually just causes like, what are you talking about? I don't understand you.
All right.
Right. But then, especially when you get two people who are in wounded spaces, or two people who are not emotionally self-responsible and they're trying to put their responsibility onto each other, then it becomes this taking, right? And the tricky part about taking is that even if the other person is freely giving their energy, freely offering their energy to you, when you take, you cannot receive. It cannot happen because you can only receive when you are in a soft, open, receptive state. And by soft, I don't mean soft as in like, yeah, walk all over me, I'm a doormat. No,
Right.
I mean, you're open. And the way that you can be open in that receptive mode is that being, emotionally self-responsible.
Right.
Because then you're good. You're cared for. You're taken care of.
Right.
You don't have to depend on anybody else to feel loved and whole and complete. And so in that space is when you're able to receive. But when you try to take, when you try to manipulate, when you try to work from that transactional space, you close yourself off.
Right. There's nothing you can receive.
No.
As much as we try.
And you can only receive this because when you're in that space, you're in expectation.
Right.
You can only receive the tiny sliver of what you expect because our expectations are like tiny compared to the potential of what is there.
Right.
And so as we begin to let go of that control, of that manipulation, of that expectation, that's when we can begin receiving so much more, the vastness. And then the work becomes to expand our ability to receive. And like, what a great lesson that is. Like, what a gift for that to be the lesson. Yeah, I love this book so much. I told you.
This has been good. I'm excited. The next chapter is even going to be great. The struggle for power is where we're headed next.
Yep.
The third insight. No, the fourth. Now we're at the fourth.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's such a.
It's 7:40.
Oh, nice. It's such a good book because I love books that are in stories.
Yeah.
It just makes it so much more captivating.
Yeah, this is definitely out of my normal reading, so I'm excited. It's been really good. All right. Well, I guess we've made it to the end.
I think so.
Thank you guys for joining us. We will conclude we will start over again next Wednesday at 6:30. And I hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.